Welcome to the Triage Method Podcast, Thursday edition, Q&A, in and out, just what you need to know, no BS. Paddy, what's this week's question?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that today we're going to make a concerted effort to actually keep this under an hour, ideally less than half an hour, ideally 20 minutes. But anyway, look, we'll see what happens. So today's question was, again, I was talking to someone in the gym and they were telling me, laying out their plans for the coming weeks, months, because obviously it's coming into the new year. And they were of the belief that you have to use low reps to build muscle, and then you have to use high reps to, effectively lose weight, right? And that was their kind of thought process going into the last few months. They're still in a quote unquote gaining phase. They're still trying to build some muscle, and they're thinking around February time that they're going to start, dieting coming into that summertime. They've had a rather successful gaining phase, and they want to see what has occurred, what muscle gains they've had, etc., coming into the summer. And they're all the belief that they should do low reps because that builds muscle, that builds strength, because there's such a high intensity, really fucking pushing yourself. You're getting stronger, whatever. And then when it's time to diet down, you up the reps because that burns more calories, and then you get those deep cuts. Maybe they do some more isolation type exercises as well, to really get like the muscularity of those muscles really just popping. Cut those fucking grooves into their muscles. And I then had a conversation with them why that isn't necessarily true or the best approach. Either side of that, using low reps to build muscle or high reps to effectively burn fat. But Gary, let's keep this quick. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so like on the like quick answer level, it's not really true. Like you don't need to change your repetition ranges based on your specific like body composition goal, i.e. more fat, less fat goal. Like you don't need to do that. Like that's not really a thing. You should be working more or less in the same repetition ranges. There's not a massive reason to be changing them. However, it doesn't mean that we can't play devil's advocate and put forth some useful arguments. One would be, if you're doing lots of high rep training, this big high volume, high rep program, are you going to burn more calories? Probably, yeah. There's reason that you could put to that. Obviously you could go to the total extreme and say, well, obviously if I do loads of sets of 100 reps, I'm going to be burning more calories than if I'm doing singles. That's obviously the extreme end of the spectrum, but it illustrates the fact that yes, there is something to this idea that your energy expenditures varies with the type of workouts that you're doing. That's fairly intuitive. Most people know that. However, I don't think that's necessarily the argument that's put forth by people who say that you should be doing like higher reps. It's more so the idea that when you do higher reps, like you're shaping the muscles, that you're kind of chiseling them down. There's something more to it, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just not the case. Like that's not what's happening. When you're training to try and maintain muscle, your goal is basically the exact same as it is when you're trying to gain muscle, and your intent should be the same. You're going to be working mostly in a rep range of somewhere of 6 to 15. Of course, you can do lower rep training, that's fine. But I mean, for most people, they probably do more of their training the 6 to 15 repetition range if they have a physique focused goal. So if you're there most of the time where you're trying to gain muscle and you're trying to progress from the bar, your goal is pretty much the exact same when you're trying to then lose fat, because you're trying to still apply the largest anabolic stimulus that you can so that you're not going in the catabolic direction. So even if you're not gaining muscle, you want to be providing the most anabolic stimulus so that you're not losing muscle. If you were to look at it the other way around and say, like if you assume that there's a particular fat burning purpose or muscle whatever cutting mechanism to higher rep training, then if you were to do that, then when you're in a calorie surplus, what would be the outcome? What would be the outcome then? Would you have the same level of muscle gain? You have to actually think about why you would be making these decisions and how it might look in the opposite direction. So basically, my basic recommendation for most people is that you use the same repetition ranges regardless. There could be a case made for potentially not using super high repetition ranges. Like if that's the way your program is solely built up, if you, let's say all your rep ranges are 15 to 30 because you're cutting, and that's the thought process you've been basically informed on so far, you have to think about what the drawbacks of that might be as well. Because I don't think it's just a case that all repetition ranges are the same. Like they can be in controlled research studies where people are told to like really push to failure. But I think in the real world, there's a bit of a difference. If someone is in an energy deficit, right, and they're doing sets of 15 to 30, then you have to think of that, like how that's going to manifest, right? If someone is in a calorie deficit, especially if they're in a significant deficit and they have a low level of body fat, generally they feel less energetic in the gym. Okay, on a actual cellular level, they're generally going to have less muscle glycogen stored. They've got less total body fat in their body, and yeah, that's unlikely to be a limiting factor, but it's still a low energy state overall. So if you've got low levels of muscle glycogen and you're trying to run a program that involves you doing, lots of sets of 15 to 30, then you're going to be gassing out much quicker than you would if you were doing, like, potentially if you were doing lower rep training, because there's more discomfort involved in doing higher rep training. And if you're also in a low energy state, then you might potentially be reaching a lower level of performance than you would had you been in a higher energy state, independent of absolute muscle strength. And what that might look like is, if you have a weight that's your standard 25 rep max, right? And that's your 25 rep max when you're in an isoenergetic state, so you're at maintenance calories, you've got plenty of energy stored away, and you haven't been in a deficit for a while. It might look like you getting maybe 22, 23 on the first set. Fine, not a massive difference in performance, maybe 10% even difference. But because you're burning through all the energy that you've got stored, you're starting to drop off. You're going 17 reps, then you're getting 13 reps. And what you have to ask yourself is that trade-off in performance, like, is that worth it? Is that potentially compromising your ability to apply an anabolic stimulus? Because there's plenty of research to show that, or not plenty, but there are a couple of studies anyway showing that the discomfort level of people when they're training at these really high repetition ranges is higher, even though you're getting the same hypertrophic stimulus as you would from a lower repetition range. And you always have to think about how there's an interaction there between physiology and your psychology or your behavior. Because if you just assume that humans are like machines and yeah, you can do whatever you want, you can always go beast mode. Like, yeah, there's some people like that. But if you're experiencing more discomfort every time you go to the gym, it's unlikely you'll get as close to failure. It's unlikely your recovery will be as good, and you'll have a bit more fatigue after your sessions. And anyone that's dieted for a long period of time knows that can be quite difficult. So putting all of that together, basically what I'm suggesting is that while what you can make the case that all these repetition ranges can lead to muscle gain, can lead to muscle retention, there are actually some potential drawbacks in the direction of the really high repetition range stuff that would make me say that you don't want to be doing it in isolation. Okay, it's probably not going to be an approach that's going to be useful on its own. However, there's also similar considerations on the other side of the spectrum. It's not just the case that, oh yeah, go in and do sets of 1 to 5. Very often when people start to get quite lean or in an energy deficit, they struggle with those kind of more powerlifting specific type training, especially if they're very lean, because maybe their joints have changed now because there's less fat on those joints. They've got different leverages because their relative weight of their torso versus their legs has now changed because of the way their fat was distributed. And you've got these sorts of considerations that might make that low rep training, that bit more difficult. Because generally when people are doing those exercises or those low reps, they're going to be doing them on the kind of your squat, your bench, your deadlift, like most of the time. And if it's the case that you're seeing drop-offs in performance, that can sometimes make you less interested in training. It can make you feel demotivated, and all of those things interplay together. So in summary, there can be some drawbacks of doing really low rep training. There can be some drawbacks of doing really high rep training. There's some logic to explain why someone would suggest that high reps are better, because you're probably going to be burning more energy, especially as you go to the extremes. But as we've said before, I wouldn't base my training, especially resistance training, on its capacity to lower your energy state, especially if you think about what that actually means for muscle retention. Muscle retention ultimately involves you being economical with your energy. You want to be able to like elicit a certain anabolic stimulus without like burning away all of your energy, because you have a certain rate of fat loss that you want to be achieving. And if you're going a bit too fast, that could potentially lead to you losing more muscle than you want. So yeah, do you have anything to pop in there?
Yeah. Ultimately, I think it comes down to looking at what the adaptations you're trying to achieve, and then looking at how they differ in a gaining environment and a losing environment, and ultimately I don't see a huge, like, ultimately obviously what we're saying is the goal is like muscle hypertrophy or muscle maintenance, right? And in my mind, very simplistically, if we look at that, again, from my understanding, my reading, you would look at that and go, what is the most optimal rep range for building muscle, right? And you would probably come to the conclusion that it's, we'll say 6 to 15, somewhere around there. And again, like, higher reps have their place, lower reps have their place. But if we're like, I want to give a fucking confidence interval that 99% of the fucking individuals that I talk to, what's the rep range they're going to benefit from? If you say 6 to 15, you're pretty good to go, And so if we then say, okay, that's probably the best for muscle building, if you want to push a bit of more strength, and you're like, I want to do a few triples, fives, that's cool. That's perfectly fine. They can definitely be a part of your training and will definitely enhance your training, right? But if we're talking purely from an aesthetic point of view, which effectively we are, because the individual that asked this question or had this thought process was looking to eventually, look a certain way on holidays during the summer, I don't see the difference between the gaining environment and the losing environment. Like, the difference in those goals, they're not hugely different. Like, in the gaining environment, you're trying to build as much muscle as possible, presumably. And in the losing environment, you're trying to maintain, if not gain, so we'll call it gaintain, as much muscle as possible in the losing environment. So in my mind, at least, you're looking at that and going, what's the most optimal way to build muscle? And again, we'd probably say somewhere in the range 6 to 15 reps. So I would just keep that throughout the whole process, because that's the adaptation that I want. If the adaptation that I want has this rep range associated with it, I'm like, this is probably the best rep range for achieving this end outcome, then I'm going to choose that. If you want to be really like minimalist and be like, right, so it's 8 to 12 reps, that's the rep range, you're bang on in the middle, you're probably even more confident that that'll work for more individuals, and again, that's not, forget about the research, like, that's anecdotally, that's what most people would find training themselves. Like, that's the way most bodybuilders and stuff have trained in the past. They'd be like, right, I do roughly 8 to 12 reps. Like, if you were to average their rep score or the rep number even over their entire training career, like, it's probably going to fall within 8 to 12 reps. That's probably the average number, is probably fucking 9.5 or something, So, like, that's probably the best way to organize your training, because that's the adaptation that you want. And while, yeah, we can argue that higher reps burn more calories, like, ultimately that pales in comparison with the calories you could burn just doing some targeted cardio,
Yeah.
Pales in comparison, like, so little by comparison, And even if you do, like, we'll call it like circuit style training. I didn't say circus, I said circuit. Circuit style training, where you're pairing exercises together, you're really keeping your heart rate up, you're going from this exercise to this exercise to this exercise, maybe doing fucking supersets, drop sets, everything. You're just fucking trying to get as much volume as you possibly can into your workout. Even still, you're not burning as much calories as you could if you were to go for a jog,
Yep.
So it's not the best way to burn calories. So you're effectively removing the best, quote unquote, stimulus to maintain your muscle or gain muscle, and you're bringing in one of the worst ways to burn calories, So you're effectively getting the worst of all worlds, not the best of all worlds, by using this approach. And that's not to say that if you do some sort of circuit style training, you're not going to maintain your muscle. Like, obviously you're still providing a stimulus to the muscle with that. It's just not as effective as like just straight resistance training. So in my mind, I'd be hard pressed to justify using low reps for gaining muscle, and I'd be hard pressed to justify using high reps to burn fat just on that low reps for building muscle. That's like, it's actually a bit of a misnomer, because like realistically we'll call them below 5 just to really simplify things. Like the percentage, we'll say you've two things that are contributing to your strength and muscle, whatever you want to call it. And that's the neurological adaptation. So your nervous system, how well you're able to coordinate the movement, all that kind of stuff, how well you're able to activate all of those muscle fibers, etc. Effectively your nervous system, right? And then you have your muscular system, right? You have those two systems. You know, most people are familiar enough with the muscular system. It's your actual muscles. Yeah, pretty straightforward. And we'll say in that kind of 8 to 12 rep range, you know, you're probably getting the most out of the muscular system while still touching on the nervous system, right? And then the further you go away in those kind of higher reps, you're getting more and more muscular system, you know, especially you're getting like upregulation of enzymes, you're getting fucking substrate utilization, all that kind of stuff. So it even goes away from like the muscular tension side of things, and it goes into kind of energy substrate kinetics effectively, right? And then as you get to the lower rep ranges, you're not actually getting the most out of your muscular system, you're actually optimizing your nervous system, which is obviously a good thing. You know, this is why like I think people should do some blocks of training where they do lower rep training. I think it's good for, you know, building confidence in lifting heavier weights, and then also, you know, actually coordinating movement, you know, and it's something that powerlifters do really, really well, you know. But it's probably not the best way to build muscle. You know, it's probably the best way to, we'll call it, optimize the amount of muscle that you have, you know, like to truly be able to express your ultimate strength, your absolute strength at the level of muscle mass that you currently have. Like, you're going to have to do some low rep training. However, there'll come a point, and you see this is powerlifters do this as well, there comes a point where they're as strong as they possibly can be with the muscle mass that they currently have, you know. So the only way for them to get stronger is to get bigger, right? And they'll engage in a block where they focus on hypertrophy, where they try to build muscle. And what rep range do they generally use? Somewhere in the 8 to 12 rep range, you know. And so that's my kind of 2 cents on the discussion. I would definitely not favor low rep training for building muscle, and I definitely would not favor high rep training for muscle unless there was a very particular reason and the individual themselves enjoyed that, you know, and they're like, this is what keeps me training. I like during the winter focusing on, you know, growing and lifting heavy weights, and then as I come into summer, I like more kind of pump style training, more endurance style training. I also layer on some cardiovascular work, so I like to effectively periodize their training throughout the year. They're like, it just makes me interested in training. I'm like, I know I have distinct periods. Winter, strength sports. That's me. I'm a strength athlete. And then summertime, they're like, I'm an endurance person. I like to, you know, go on more hikes, walks, do all that kind of stuff. I like to go for some jogs in the sun on the beach, whatever it is. And they're like, I want my training to support that. I'm not trying to, optimize my muscle mass over many years. Like, yes, it is important to me. Yes, I want to have muscle mass and look a certain way. Like, that's obviously important to most people. But the only time I justify those two approaches is if that individual was like, yeah, no, that's my lifestyle. Summer is fitness, quote unquote, and then winter is strength, quote unquote. So that's really the only situation where I justify that approach.
Yeah, and just to reiterate again, the goal of weight training is not to burn calories, okay? In general, if you're going to try and design an exercise program or a weight training program that burns the most calories, it's probably taking you further away from your potential to build muscle. And that's not always true, but generally the conditions that favor you burning the most calories are not the conditions that favor the conditions of building the most muscle. Like, if you're trying to maximize the amount of tension that you place on muscle fibers, that's generally not going to be the outcome if the primary limiting factor of your performance is basically energy systems based, is basically your ability to, you know, buffer acidosis, your ability to continue delivering glucose to your muscles. Like, they're the limiting factors of some of the types of programs, such as like circuit training, for example. your ability to continue delivering oxygen to your muscles. You're basically testing that interplay between your cardiovascular system and your muscular system, and still your nervous system to supply that. That's what you're doing when you start to do those really high rep circuit style training. You're never actually getting to the extreme end of your muscles' ability to actually continue to produce force, to produce tension, to deal with tension. So yeah, you don't want to go too far to the extreme on either end. And it comes back to the classic recommendation of, somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot with most things in life, and that is the case here. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say, really. I guess, take on point. Do most of your training, if you're a physique, muscle-focused person, in that kind of 6 to 15 repetition range. You can absolutely do plenty of triples and fives and singles if you want. It can be absolutely built into your program. But doing just singles at the extreme is probably not the best approach. Doing just sets of 30, probably not the best approach. Both can work. You're going to build muscle with both. You're going to get stronger with both. You're going to have some enzymatic changes in your muscle with both, but there's a spectrum there. And once you understand that spectrum and how that relates to your goals, you can make some effective decisions.
Now, you just said I could do fives, threes, and ones. What about twos, fours, sevens, and nines?
I actually don't mind fours, but twos is always a dodgy one for me. I actually love programming sevens. I always discuss the 7 to 9 range is my favorite at the moment.
It's not a range, like.
My clients are definitely looking at their sets of 7 to 9, and they're like, "What?
6 to 8."
No, I like 7 to 9 because if you do 5 to 7 and then 7 to 9, I feel like if like 5 to 7 is nice. I used to do 4 to 6. I don't like 4 to 6, and 3 to 5 is for a range is just too big. I feel like there's a massive difference between 3 and 5. Like,
yeah, you always say this as well with your ranges. Like, you use way too big of jumps. Like, and people do this all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, like the 8 to 12 rep range." It's just not a rep range.
I love 8 to 12.
There's like a 20% difference in the weight you can use for like your 12 reps versus the 8 reps. Like, we'll say just arbitrarily, 12 reps is generally fucking 70%, right? And 8 reps is generally like 80%, right? There's a 10% gap in that. That's like saying like, oh yeah, like 4 to 8 rep range.
It's not though.
It is actually no. It's more like saying 3 to 8 rep range, because fucking 8 reps is generally 80% and 3 reps is generally 90%. So if you're like, oh, it's a 10% gap, like that's how I fucking program. Makes no sense. That's like saying like, oh yeah, the 3 to 8 rep range and then the 8 to 12 rep range. Those 2 rep ranges are the ones that I use. It's retarded.
And eat between 1,200 and 3,000 calories. Like, that's my general recommendation.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
No, I love the 8 to 12 because it works well in practice. Like, at least when I'm advising clients, because it's like they start off with 8, and like getting your 8 rep max up to your 12 rep max is not that hard, because most people don't actually practice those repetition ranges like seriously. So if you start with an 8 rep max, and you can actually get your 12 rep max up. So but getting your 3 rep max up to your 8 rep max, like, that's it.
You could just program like a normal human and use like a 6 to 8 rep range and a 10 to 12 rep range and not have a fucking huge gap between them, you disgusting human being.
I'm an 11 to 13 guy.
I'm just going to do 17 reps today.
Oh, set of 17. I'm definitely going to, next program, all right, it's going to be three sets of 13 and then 6 sets of 17. Oh, imagine seeing 6 sets of 17 on the program.
If someone came up to you and you were like, oh, like, what's your best in the bench press? And they're like, oh, I do like 100 kilos for 9s. You just be like, get out of here. Just get out.
Why did you not do 10?
You'd be like, why didn't you just stop at 8 or just go for that extra one? Like, anyway, look, that's an aside. Where can people find us? Where can people engage? All of that stuff, Gary. Do your little marketing spiel.
You can, of course, engage with our one-to-one coaching. If you'd rather have really boring, mundane repetition ranges programmed for you, you can work with Mr. Patrick Farrell. If you'd rather come to the dark side, the wild side, and do some sets of 13, you're more than welcome to work with me as well. If you'd like to just not engage with our services, you can, of course, just check out our newsletter, Triage Method newsletter, linked below. And that's where we send out all of our content that we've put out, and also content that we found from other people that we think will be helpful. you should certainly join the Triage Method community. That's our Facebook group. Engage with us, see what we're posting, see what other stuff we're interested in, have some conversations, send in some training clips, all that sort of stuff. Follow the rest of our social media, our YouTube channel. I'm going to be putting up a lot of YouTube videos over the Christmas period now because I'm off for a couple of weeks. So we have got some videos planned that we're going to put up. So you should check those out.
And still pray for me because I have an exam still tomorrow after that, whatever day that is. It's the 20th tomorrow. This is going up on the 19th. Obviously, if you're listening to this in the future, then why are you listening to this in the future? Why aren't you like first in as soon as this comes up on your fucking podcasting app at 5 a.m.? Why aren't you like, wake up, fucking set the alarm, fucking listen to the Triage boys?
You should be.
But
you could
still have an exam.
Pray for Patrick and then join our group coaching. The group online coaching is a lower level service in that it's not as intensive one-to-one as the one-to-one coaching. Basically, you're unlikely to be programmed set to 13 or 17 because Paddy will probably change it before I publish it, so sorry, but that is life. There's a male and female option there as well. Breed Long is helping out with the female one, so she's leading that. So you've got a lady in your corner. And as far as I know, she also does not program sets of 11 to 13. So I'm going to have a word with her.
I'd just fire her. If I saw that on that document, if I saw 7 on that, I'd be like, well, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Get out.
And yeah, that's about everything. Check out the program templates, beginner's guidebook in the store. And that is all my shilling for this week.
Wonderful, Gary. You did a fantastic job. The only thing I'd say is if you could like, comment, subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. That does actually help the YouTube algorithm. And if you're listening to it on the podcast, if you could just write a review, that'd be handy. I don't even care if you go on the review and go, look, I don't like Gary. He's from Kerry. Don't really like Kerry people, but that Patrick guy, he's pretty sound. That'd be fine. That'd be cool. And if you do have questions, of course, again, like this is the Q&A episode. We do have about 30 questions to get through. But if you do have questions, there is a link below, I do believe. Or at least you can find it on our website as well. And you can submit your question. So yeah, I have nothing else to shill other than that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. The next time you'll hear us, it'll be like 2 days before Christmas. Don't ever speak like that again. But yeah, that's me out. Gary, do you have anything else to say?
No, sir. Peace, love, and prosperity to you all.